Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And today's episode, this is in response to a lot of questions that I've been getting. I guess I kind of forget, when you're in the medical field for your whole life, you kind of forget what most people know and what most people don't. And I've noticed where I've been asked questions as I go through all my podcasts and through my book, even that a lot of people don't really understand what the whole digestive tract is. They know there's a stomach, they know it's somewhere in the stomach, but they really don't know what all is in there. So, since our digestion and our gut health is so extremely important to our overall health, I thought for this episode, I want to talk exactly about just what does the normal, healthy, functioning GI tract, what does it do? What is the purpose of it? How does it work? And this goes all the way from the mouth all the way to the anus. And then in the next episode, it's going to be kind of like part two. I'll break these our GI tract, our gastrointestinal tract down and let you see what happens depending on whether we eat healthy food, which is God-made food, real meat, real fruit, real vegetables, or extremely unhealthy fake food that's just full of toxins, which is what man makes, is what you get from the grocery store. And it is crazy how horrible that food that man makes is to our digestive tract, which means how horrible it is to our entire health. And we've obviously seen that since every single disease that you could possibly think of, that if you go back and look at the history of it, almost every single one of them went from a low level rate to an extremely high, massive amounts of sick people with all kinds of disease states right around the basically late 60s to early 80s. And this is right where they were coming up with our new fake food pyramid that was actually just a marketing scheme from the sugar company to help the food industry promote its products. No scientific backing behind the food pyramid whatsoever. And I've talked about that in the past. But because of this horrible marketing thing that they said is the food pyramid, everybody started eating this way, the low fat, no fat, mostly carb way, and it's killing us. It's absolutely killed us. And now we have almost 50 years of evidence to prove this is true. So today's episode, we're just going to talk about the GI tract. It's almost like it's just going to be like an anatomy lesson, but I'm really going to try to keep this just as simple as possible. So first, I want you to know, as far as the GI tract, as far as your nervous system, we have two different types of nervous system. We have the somatic nervous system, and we have the autonomic nervous system. And trust me, I'm not going to go into a bunch of things. I just want you to kind of just listen generally of what this is. Somatic nervous system, that's a nervous system that we can control with our thoughts, like moving our hands, moving our fingers, moving our feet, legs, all that. We can control that. That's the somatic nervous system. Then there's an autonomic nervous system that we don't control. Our body just does it on its own. Our body is doing so many things all the time that we don't even know. Of the autonomic nervous system, there's two different types. There's the sympathetic and there's the parasympathetic. The sympathetic, think of this is the nervous system that feels sorry for you. This is the one that's going to help you escape when there's danger. This is your fight or flight. So when you're getting ready to do a fight or flight, think of all the things that happen. Your pupils dilate so you can see better. Your breathing rate increases. Your heart rate increases. The blood shuts away from your GI tract, away from your gut into your muscles so you can run, so you can escape. That's a sympathetic nervous system, okay? So all those things that happen. Parasympathetic is the exact opposite. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one that happens after you've killed your bear and you're sitting down to a nice bear meal. This is when everything goes in reverse. Your pupils, they constrict back down. Your breathing rate slows down. Your heart rate slows down. All the blood shunts back to your GI tract and starts working on digestion now, so you can digest that food. Okay, so everything I want to be talking about in this digestion, okay, through our GI tract is the parasympathetic nervous system. This all goes on without you having any control. The only control you have is what are you actually putting in your mouth. And that one thing is going to determine whether you are sick or whether you are healthy. It all determines what food you put in your mouth. And again, God-made food, real meat, real fruit, real vegetables, good to go. Man-made food, box, bottle, bag, can, all this horrible stuff with ultra-processed seeds and high fructose corn syrup and sugar and these horrible seed oils. That's toxic. That's the stuff you've got to keep out of there. So this is what I do. As far as the do's and don'ts for the parasympathetic nervous system, What you want to do is because it's parasympathetic. Remember, this is the part that's relaxing. It's not your fight or flight. So you need to calm down. You need to be sitting down. You don't need to be driving. You don't need to be multitasking. You don't need to be standing. You don't need to be going to a meeting. You need to just be sitting down and relaxing. And you want to chew your food like 20 to 30 times. Allow your brain to realize that you're hungry. Allow the saliva to start building up so you can digest your food better. And we'll talk about that. That's what you want to do. What you don't want to do is sit at your desk, eat while you're driving the car, stand while you're eating. Like I said, multitasking. You don't want to drink very much water, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. But while you're actually eating, you really don't want to drink that much water then. You can drink it in between meals, but not then. And because that's going to dilute out your stomach acid, and we'll talk about that. Because everything we talk about for this whole episode, we're talking about pH and we're talking about microbiome, okay? pH means the potential hydrogen, and this is a scale on acidity. So it ranges from 0 to 14 is the pH scale. The lower half from 0 to 7, that's the acidic range. And the upper half from 7 to 14, that's the basic range. Now, whether you have something extremely basic, something around 14, like sodium hydroxide, that is extremely strong base. But if you're down at the other end around 0 or 1, this is hydrochloric acid, extremely strong acid. So whether you're at the extreme of 14 or the extreme of 0, these are very strong. These products could eat a hole right through anything. Okay. And then 7's right in the middle. 7 that's your neutral pH. And that's where you want your water to be, is around pH of 7. Okay. So our gut works in a very low pH. And so, and we'll talk about that as we go through this. But basically, digestion, like I said, it begins as soon as the brain signals your salivary glands to start producing saliva. So you don't even have to have food in your mouth. Just, walking by a bakery or walking by a meat shop or whatever it is that causes your saliva to start stimulating, you smell, a sight, something like that, you automatically start producing saliva. And this is on purpose because this is the very first part of digestion. So you're getting your body ready for digestion. And then it ends down at the very end when you actually have a bowel movement through your anus. Okay. So mouth to anus, that's what we're talking about. So digestion is the breakdown of food. It's when you take food and you break this down into all its basic nutrients. Remember, proteins get broken down to amino acids, fats get broken down to fatty acids, and carbohydrates, which means plant-based foods, carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. So as I say all the time, if you're having trouble with glucose, quit putting carbohydrates in your mouth. It really, truly is that easy. But anyway, and all these episodes I've had are just different ways of explaining that. But anyway, that's what it does. It breaks down the food, gets the chemicals, all the nutrients ready for absorption, and then it eliminates all the waste and toxins out of your anus. And that's what the digestive tract is supposed to be doing. However, within this digestive tract, there are a whole huge amount of things that happen because this is not only does it break down and absorb nutrients, but it also it has a lot of immune cells. Our intestines house most of our body's immune cells to help fight any kind of infection that we may be ingesting through our mouth and other ways. But it helps break down all those bacteria and viruses and funguses and everything. So the acid that's in our stomach is going to help break that down. So if you have a poor digestive health, that means you're going to be sicker. People who eat the wrong kinds of foods, they have the wrong kinds of bacteria, they change pH in the stomach, they have extremely horrible digestive tracts, and this makes them horribly sick. Versus if you have a healthy digestion, you eat healthy, God-made food, you keep all your intestines intact and you keep it healthy, this is how you're going to be a healthy person. They just goes in hand. A sick GI tract is a sick person, a healthy GI tract is a healthy person. That's just the way it is. And I hope you understand that by the time I finish with this. But what happens when you eat nutrient-dense foods, your body sits there and it mechanically breaks it up. So this is your chewing. This is when you get into the mouth. You're chemically breaking up the chewing, and you chew your food. And you want to break this down as small as you possibly can. That's why they say 20 to 30 chews with each bite. Break that down as small as you can. Get more surface in there so the saliva can get in there, and the saliva can break all that down. So it can be very small by the time it gets into your intestines or into your stomach. Now, this is very important So when you chew, when you have saliva, saliva has different things. It has water in it, and it also has enzyme. The main enzyme it has is amylase, and amylase is the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates. So when you put food in your mouth, your saliva and you're chewing breaks it into small pieces. The water lubricates the food so it can start going through your intestinal tract. And then the amylase in there starts digestion by breaking down the carbohydrates. Now you swallow that. The next thing that happens, oh, that also in your mouth, a lot of times just smelling something sweet can start stimulating your body to start producing insulin. You could put something sweet in your mouth and then spit it out, and your body is still going to produce insulin because it thinks you're getting ready to eat and digest carbohydrates, which is glucose, and your body does not want a high blood glucose. So it does everything it can to keep your blood glucose low. And that's the first thing, is stimulate your insulin. So all that happens just in the mouth. Now you swallow it, that goes through your feeding tube, which is the esophagus. And the esophagus is just a tube from your mouth down to your stomach. But before it gets into the stomach, there's a little sphincter. A sphincter is a circular or a ring-shaped muscle. And you have several sphincters all through your digestive tract. And I'll explain each one of those as we go. But think of the sphincter just like your pupil. Your pupil is also a sphincter. So if you go in, say you go in the bathroom and you shut the light off and you're looking in the mirror and you're trying to see yourself, and then all of a sudden you turn the light on and you'll watch your pupils go from very dilated because it's trying to get as much light as possible. Then you turn the light on and it gets too much light. So the sphincter will go down. It'll constrict down to very tiny. That is what a sphincter does. It's just like the pupil. And you have these sphincters all through your intestinal tract. The first one you're going to come in contact with is the lower esophageal sphincter. So that's a sphincter muscle, a regular muscle that separates the feeding tube from the stomach. And this is very important. So the food needs to be a certain size. It needs to be chopped up very small so it can get down through that lower esophageal sphincter and go into the stomach. And this lower esophageal sphincter is only supposed to be opened when you're swallowing, when you're burping, and when you're vomiting. That's about the only time. But as you'll see in next episode, there's things that we eat that lessen this, decreases the tone of this lower esophageal sphincter, which starts running into all kinds of things, acid reflux, just all kinds of problems. We'll talk about that next week. So that's the purpose of the lower esophageal sphincter. That's supposed to regulate the amount of food that's going into the stomach. Once it gets in the stomach does several things. One, it's there to store food. It's supposed to sit there and hold the food while your body's sitting there and digesting it with a stomach acid. Now, remember, he talked about the pH. Okay, pH scale of 1 to 14. Remember, 0 was going to be the very, very strongest pH. Your stomach acid has a pH of 1.5 to 3. So that's why it's called stomach acid. It is actually acid. It's very acidic. Your stomach acid is made up of hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and mucus. Hydrochloric acid is one of the strongest acids. It has a pH of 0 to 1. It's very strong. So that's a pH of 0 to 1, but the whole stomach acid is pH of 1.5 to 3 because it also has things like pepsin and mucus and water and other things that are all mixed up in that. But still, a pH of 1.5 to 3 is a very strong acid. But this hydrochloric acid, it is there not only to break up food, but also to kill all the germs that you're eating. Because food, we have germs all around us. We have bacteria, viruses, funguses all around us in the air. But our body is made, if you have a healthy body, our bodies are made to withstand those. And if you eat them, this is the way it does it, by taking the hydrochloric acid in the digestive tract or in the stomach. The other thing hydrochloric acid does is it activates enzymes that are going to help break down your food. And I'll be going through that in just a little bit also. So pepsin is actually, this is what breaks down protein. But actually what you have in your stomach is pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is a precursor. So when hydrochloric acid starts working on pepsinogen, it turns it into pepsin. And now pepsin can start breaking down the proteins in your stomach. So amylase starts breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. Pepsin starts breaking down protein in the stomach. And then you also have mucus that's in the stomach acid also. And that mucus has helped to protect the stomach lining against this very, very strong pH. So it's very important that we keep our pH of our stomach between 1.5 and 3. That's how we do everything. It's how we kill bacteria, break down food, turn pepsinogen into pepsin, have mucus, everything. So 1.5 to 3 is very important. Now, at the bottom of the stomach, once you're out of the stomach, down in the bottom, you also, and not very many things get absorbed through the stomach. The only thing that gets absorbed through the stomach is a little bit of water, alcohol, and some medications. But almost everything else gets digested in the small intestine. And that's why we're going to be talking most of this time about the small intestine. But so at the top of the stomach, we had the lower esophageal sphincter that separates the esophagus from the stomach. At the bottom of the stomach, you have the pyloric sphincter. Okay. And this separates the bottom of the stomach to the small intestine. And again, this pyloric sphincter is very important. It's another sphincter. It's a ring-shaped muscle, but it's very tiny. This pyloric sphincter is only about 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter. So just to let you understand, a credit card is about 1 millimeter thickness. And the tip on a brand new crayon is about 2 millimeters. So the amount, the how open this pylorus gets is very important. So food has to really be broken down very, very well to be able to go through the pyloric sphincter into the first part of the small intestine. Now, when we talk about the intestines, there's the small intestine and there's the large intestine. And the small intestine is broken down into 3 different parts. You have the duodenum or duodenum, pronounced either way. Then you have the ileum, and then you have the jejunum. Okay, I mean jejunum and then the ileum. Sorry about that. So it's the duodenum, then the jejunum, and then the ileum. Yeah, okay, that's what it is. Okay, now it's called the small intestine. Okay, but it's called small intestine because of its diameter, not because of its length. Because our intestinal tract, we have about 22 feet of small intestine, but it's only about 1 to 1.2 inches in diameter. Okay, so it's very long, but it's little, versus the large intestine, which is only 5 foot compared to 22 foot, but it's going to be around 2.4 to 3 inches. So it's 2 to 3 times larger in diameter than the small intestine, even though the small intestine is much, much longer. Like I said, 22 feet versus 5. The other thing is, if you take the small intestine, you cut it open, you spread it out, there's a lot of little creases and wrinkles in the intestine because that increases the amount of absorptive space we have. If you cut open that 22-foot small intestine and open it up, spread it out, it would take up about the size of a tennis court. So we have a lot of absorptive area in our small intestine, and this is so important for everything that it needs to be done. Because again, this is the area where we have all our nutrient breakdown, our nutrient absorption, detoxification of toxins that we eat, and also this how we eliminate all the waste. So, and the way this does that, a big way, one, pH makes all the difference in the world, and also our gut microbiome, which is the bacteria in our gut. We have trillions of bacteria in our gut, and these are good, healthy, wonderful bacteria that do so many good things. And I'm really not going to go into it right now. I did an entire podcast, episode number 24, on why is having bacteria in our gut important. And it truly, truly is. However, you can change a good, healthy gut with good, healthy microbiome if you eat poor, fake, man-made food like you get from a grocery store and box, bottle, bag, and can. Anything that has a label on it that has all these chemicals in it. When you eat that kind of food, you change the bacteria in your gut from a good, healthy bacteria that provides health to a horrible, destructive bacteria that causes all kinds of diseases, autoimmune diseases, allergies, all kinds of things, all by the type of food you put in your mouth. So our gut microbiome is very, very important. I'll just read some things that it does. One, the gut microbiome, it aids in our digestion. It helps synthesize a lot of vitamins from our foods. It helps break them down and get a lot of the vitamins that we need, like B1, B9, B12, vitamin K. We need our good, healthy bacteria to get those. It also helps support our immune function. Most of the neurotransmitters, like in our brain, these are actually produced by the bacteria in our gut. So these are extremely important also. And we'll talk more about that next week also. It also, like I said, it protects against pathogens, anything that might get in our food. And our gut bacteria does that. And then it keeps our gut lining very, very healthy. If you have healthy bacteria, you can kind of think of our intestinal lining like pantyhose. Okay, so things can go through it with no problem. But when you eat when you get the bad bacteria, because you're eating this horrible man-made food, you change bacteria, and now these bacteria can actually cause that fishnet or those pantyhose to turn in looking like fishnet stockings. So things that used to be able to stay in our gut, now they don't anymore. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these immune diseases, autoimmune diseases, gluten problems. I mean, there's so many things. And again, that'll be next week. But it's really important to realize that our gut bacteria is extremely important for our health. The other thing it does, like I said, it integrates our gut bacteria. Also, it produces a lot of our neurotransmitters. Like if you've ever heard of serotonin or dopamine or GABA or acetylcholine or norepinephrine. These neurotransmitters, even though they work in the brain, they work on our nervous system, most of it is actually produced from the gut bacteria in your intestines. So again, if you have different bacteria because of the type of food you're eating, you're not going to be producing the types of neurotransmitters you see. And that's why you hear all over the place now that they think that a lot of it, the types of food that we're eating, is causing a lot of the psychotic issues that we have right now. But again, I'll talk about that next week. But so these are all important. So now go back. So this is the gut bacteria in our intestine. Remember, our small intestine is the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Now, of the duodenum, this first part of the small intestine, it's only about 10 inches long, less than a foot. But so many things happen in that first little 10 inches, because this is where first, if it's going from the food that's in the stomach, goes through the pyloric sphincter, and it gets into the very first part of the small intestine called the duodenum or duodenum. It has to enter the duodenum at a pH of 1.5 to 3 in order for our body to work the way it's supposed to do, the rest of our digestive tract. And that's what I'm going to try to explain here. So and this is all the health, this is the healthy digestion. So it enters our duodenum at a pH of 1.5 to 3. And because of that acidity of that, this stimulates our pancreas or our liver start producing bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate. And this also, it causes our gallbladder that has bicarbonate in it to be released into the duodenum. And a bicarbonate has a pH of like 8.3. So it's called a weak base. But remember, 7 is neutral, below that is acid, above that is base. So sodium bicarbonate, pH of 8.3, gets secreted into the first part of our liver. And this helps neutralize that stomach acid. So it takes our stomach acid from 1.5 to 3, and it puts it into a pH of around 7 to 8.5. Okay. You don't have to remember these numbers. Just remember extremely acidic to weakly basic, because weakly basic is how our intestines work best, as long as we have that acid to begin with. And just so you know, our blood is about a pH of around 7.35 to 7.45. Our bodies do many things to keep that pH right there. Our body knows exactly what it needs to function at its best, and it does everything it can to do that. So between our kidneys and our liver and our lungs, we regulate our pH of our blood very, very closely, 7.35 to 7.45. Well, our GI tract is supposed to do that also, as long as we help it with the type of food that we eat. But it maintains its stomach acid around 7 to 8.5. So when this secretin, the secretin is a hormone, and secretin is what is caused by the pH coming out of the stomach of 1.5 to 3. That stimulates secretin. This secretin hormone is what stimulates the bicarb to come from the liver and the gallbladder and the common bile duct, and I'll talk about that. But it also stops gastric acid secretion. So once food starts going in the intestines, you don't need acid in the stomach anymore. So secretin makes that gastric acid stop producing, or slows it down. And then also it delays gastric emptying. So the secretin wants to keep the food in the stomach as long as possible, so it can slowly drip through. It can get as much digestion as possible before it gets into the intestine. And then this also, it stimulates pancreatic enzymes. So your pancreas produces these enzymes that break down protein, called protease, breaks down carbohydrates, called amylase, and breaks down fats or lipids, called lipase. And those all get secreted from the pancreas, and it does it in response to secretin. And secretin is in response to a low pH coming out of the stomach. And the reason I keep going over this is you'll see next week, because we do all kinds of things that raise the pH of our stomach and totally screws up our digestive health. But So that's what it's doing. It's basically it's regulating our bile flow. The other hormone that that we have that's produced in the intestines, and we've talked about this several times in the past. There's cholecystokinin, which is stimulated by the presence of fat in the intestines, and then you have peptide YY, which is basically stimulated by the presence of protein in our intestines. Cholecystokinin is extremely important, and I talked all about this in episode 20 on what makes you hungry and not hungry, and they'll talk all about cholecystokinin and peptide YY. But the other thing with cholecystokinin is cholecystokinin, because when it comes in contact with fat in the intestines, stimulates cholecystokinin, and that's what stimulates our bile duct or our gallbladder to squeeze and push that bile that it's had that's stored inside of it, push that bile into the common bile duct and go into the intestines. So you have to have fat in your intestines in order for it to stimulate cholecystokinin, so the gallbladder would constrict and empty that. If you do not have fat in your intestines, you are not producing that cholecystokinin, and the gallbladder becomes very thick and mucousy, and that's what people end up with gallstones and all kinds of gallbladder issues. They would take care of it if they just ate healthy and they ate good, healthy animal meat when they ate their food, and that would keep their digestive tract working appropriately. That's why we're seeing all kinds of gallbladder diseases. Anyway, well, again, that's for next week. But cholecystokinin stimulates that. The bile is actually produced in the liver, and it's just stored in the gallbladder. But the bile, it's a greenish yellow fluid, and what it does is it emulsifies the fats. It takes all the fat in the intestines, breaks that down into tiny, tiny little fat lobules that can get absorbed into the lymphatics, out of the intestines, in the lymphatic system, and then into the blood. But that's very, very important, because we have to have fat to stimulate cholecystokinin, to stimulate the bile, but we also have to have fat to absorb our fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamins A, D, E, and K. So what this bile is made up of, it's made up of water, it's made up of phospholipids, it's made up of cholesterol and bile salts, but the bile salts are actually derived from cholesterol. Because remember, cholesterol is extremely important. Every single cell in our body makes cholesterol. Everybody being put on all these cholesterol lowering medications is just killing everybody. It's horrible. So we need cholesterol, and I've talked about that in past podcasts also. And this also has bilirubin, which is the breakdown product of red blood cells, and that's what gives the bile that yellowish greenish look. And then it also has electrolytes and some metals like copper. So there's a lot of things that's in bile, and again, this is produced in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, stimulated by cholecystokinin to go out of the gallbladder into the common bile duct. The common bile duct is what actually empties into the duodenum. Okay, so again, all we talked about so far is the stomach, the first part of the small intestine, and now we're talking about the common bile duct. It's called the common bile duct because it's made up of the hepatic duct that comes from the liver, the pancreatic duct comes from the pancreas, and the cystic duct that comes from the gallbladder. All three of those ducts come together into what's called the common bile duct, and that empties through another sphincter called the sphincter of Oddi. And that's a sphincter that releases the common bile duct into the first part of the small intestine. And that has all this bile. That's where it's, and the bicarb, that's where it lowers it increases the pH of the stomach to the pH of the stomach acid. So it can be a higher pH as it goes through our intestines. It has all the enzymes that break down our food and everything. So the common bile duct is again, it's the common bile duct because it's hepatic duct, cystic duct, and pancreatic duct. The cystic duct, like I said, it empties the gallbladder that stores the bile, and that goes through the bile duct. The hepatic duct, it makes all the stuff. It makes everything else that's in the bile, except like the amylase. That's amylase, protease, and lipase. Those are going to be coming from the pancreas through the pancreatic duct into the common duct. So this is where the hepatic duct is so important, and the liver itself is so important. This is where you get gluconeogenesis, which means making glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, because all carbohydrates are made out of glucose. But what we want to be able to do is make glucose out of non-carbohydrate sources, which our liver does. It can make glucose out of protein. It can make glucose out of fat. So we never, ever, ever have to eat a plant-based food ever. And we get all the glucose we need just from the protein, the fat that we already have. And that happens in the liver. The liver also stores vitamins and iron. It also destroys red blood cells. Our spleen mainly does, but our liver also destroys our old red blood cells. And then it also destroys our pancreas, or our liver produces or takes care of poisons too. That's why if you're eating lots of poisons, you can overwhelm your liver, which is what people do when they eat all this ultra processed food. Um, and then and that goes all through the hepatic duct. So the pancreatic duct, the things that are made in the pancreas, one, the pancreas makes insulin and glucagon. And we've talked about those in the past, but that's what helps with your sugar regulation. But then it also makes protease to break down the proteins, bicarbonate to neutralize the acid, amylase to break down the carbohydrates, and lipase to break down the lipids. All of that is coming from the pancreas, through the pancreatic duct, into the common bile duct, through the sphincter of Oni, into the very first part of the duodenum. So that's what I'm saying. Even though the duodenum is only 10 inches long, about, a lot of things are being secreted into that area that's going to help with that digestion all the way through the rest of the tract. So the last part, the jejunum, remember the entire small intestine about 22 feet long. So most of this is going to be the ileum. So you have the jejunum, which is the middle part, and that's about 9 feet long. And then you have the ileum. That's the last part. That's about 13 feet long. So all together with all three of those, about 22 feet of intestine, small intestine, all coiled together right there in your stomach. Not your stomach, but right there in your abdomen. Okay. That's the small intestine. And again, it's not small because it's short. It's small because of the diameter. So then after all this stuff passes through the jejunum and the ileum, and this is the part where you complete your digestion, you have more mucus secreted, so it protects your intestinal wall. You get a lot of nutrients and water absorption. And then there's also where peptide YY comes in, which also is stimulated by protein. And cholecystokinin and peptide YY, also, the way I've talked about them in the past, is both of those, when you have fat and protein in your intestines, this actually stimulates the medial hypothalamus of the brain and tells you that you're not hungry, so stop eating. So when you eat protein and fat, as it travels all the way through this 22 feet of intestines, it's constantly stimulating these hormones that keeps your body feeling full. You do not get that with carbohydrates at all. That's why you're always starving when you eat carbohydrates. So now you have the food going through the small intestine. They're all the way down to the end of the ileum now. And the next thing it does is it goes into the large intestine, or the colon. But before it goes into the colon, it has to go through another sphincter. And this is called the ileocecal valve. And ileal, because ileum is the last part of the small intestine. Cecum is the very first part of the colon, the large intestine. It's just a little pouch that's on there that helps also with digestion. So you have an ileocecal valve, which is a sphincter, and it has a very important role of keeping things in the colon, like the water and bacteria and toxins and all that. It keeps that in there. So as it passes through the small intestine, gets into the colon, you don't want any of that stuff coming back, because that's already all the metabolic waste that we've been producing. So the ileocecal valve is extremely important to keep that intact. Then as food gets down through the ileocecal valve, it goes in the colon. The colon, like I said earlier, is only about 5 feet long compared to the 22 feet of intestine. But it's called the large intestine because of its diameter. Again, the small intestine is around 1 to 2.5, or around 1 inch, basically. It's around 1 inch. And the colon is going to be around 2.4 to 3 inches. So that's why it's called the large intestine. And what you have, when your intestines are all like spaghetti inside your abdomen. The colon, however, is very succinct. It starts in the lower right-hand corner. That's where your small intestine goes into your colon, right there through the ileocecal valve. That's where your appendix are, right there at the beginning, and your cecum. Then the colon comes up your body. I don't know if you can see this. Up the right side of your body. That's the ascending colon. Then it goes across, right underneath your rib cage. It goes across. Okay, that's the transverse colon. And then it goes down. That's a descending colon. And then you have a little bit that goes from your lower left abdomen, and it goes right to your anus. And that's a sigmoid colon. So that the colon is up, over, down, and across to your anus. That's how it is, how it works. That's why if you have pain in your lower right-hand corner, that's where your cecum is, and that's where your appendix are. So that's usually indicative of appendicitis. But anyway, so that's your colon. Your colon, the main thing your colon does is it reabsorbs most of the water. So when you have colitis, when you have inflammation in colon and you have real watery stools, that's usually because of something's broken down that colon and now it can't reabsorb the water like it used to be able to. And so you have these watery stools. If you have a good, healthy colon, it absorbs that water and makes your stools very firm, but not too firm. And then that's the other thing that the colon does, it forms and stores their feces until you're ready to actually expel it. Then after it goes from your large intestine, it goes into a little holding chamber right at the end of the sigmoid colon called the rectum. And again, that just stores your feces until you're ready to go to the bathroom, and then you excrete that through another sphincter called your anal sphincter. And that's your anal sphincter is the last sphincter that it goes through before it goes into the stool or wherever you're putting it. So that's the intestinal tract. There's a lot of stuff in here. I know this was a long one, but I think knowing the intestinal tract is extremely important, especially when we talk about next week, what happens when this wonderful system that God has made for us breaks down because of the types of food that we eat. And it can cause all kinds of havoc after that. So I know this was a lot of information, in a small spot. I really didn't know how to do this. I don't mean to be drying you with a fire hose, but hopefully, if you really care about it, you can go back and you listen again. It might make more sense. But that's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for listening, as always. And also, as always, please live a healthy, happy life.